Um, so this week was the first chapter, Don't Be a Know-It-All. And the first half of the book, up to chapter 10, deals with more of like a kind of a foundation in epistemology. And so the first chapter deals with presumptions. So he talks about a colleague that he'd worked with who was with him on a crime scene and immediately jumped to conclusions about who had done who had committed this murder of a woman on the crime scene, and how oh, I've done this 40 years, kid. He's like, I've been doing this for a long time, kid. Stranger murders are pretty rare. So he's made all these presumptions about who did it and how, and then as ultimately it turned out he was completely wrong, and that it wasn't who he thought it was somebody else. So how that translates into our perception of reality, the universe, and how non-believers have similar presumptions about naturalistic theories of the universe, and there's nothing beyond the physical, and to be prepared for those kinds of presumptions. Yeah, there he is.
Hey, environmental group over there.
Environmental group?
Save the Cougars.
Hmm?
The Cougars, the new law they want to pass, where you can't kill them anymore, so just let them get stuck.
Oh, yeah. Gotcha.
Yes, if you got a cat or a dog, you'll be losing it soon. You just ship them to Ohio.
Yeah. Did you have a chance to read the first chapter?
No, I didn't, but
That's all right.
I
We're
did.
discussing it now.
Oh, I see, okay. I'll try to bring it up on my nothing.
So in your encounters with non-believers, or in your encounters with people in general, I suppose, can you think of any presumptions that you've run into where, like, you're talking about belief in God or in Christ, and something comes up that you realize that they've already arrived at a conclusion before you can even talk about what you're discussing? Have you ever encountered that?
Well, my brother-in-law a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago, said something about, the world was not made in 6,000 years, like they say. It was made in however many millions or billions of years. And he says, and that's a fact. And I'm reading Tactics.
Mm-hmm.
So I was not prepared. I was just silent. I didn't respond to it. I thought I didn't want to take up the gauntlet, but I wouldn't have been prepared to answer. So does that kind of fall into what you're saying about that he had a presumption, or?
Yeah, I think so. I think the presumption there would be that the only facts that are reliable are those that are scientifically provable, right? So like there's kind of an approach to knowledge that I only accept facts that are perhaps I may be making presumptions of my own here.
Yeah.
Well, the age of the earth in that is that they're theories. They haven't been proven.
Yeah.
So we've proven the Bible. You haven't proven your theory about two particles starting the whole universe.
So what do you think about that presumption that only scientific or provable truths are truth? What do you think about that? And it's kind of straight out of Tactics, right? Like,
It is, and I want to get better at that, because just as a segue in a way, as I was rereading this last night, I realized I had presumptions.
yeah, we all do, don't we?
I had presumptions about Christianity and assuming that I believe I'm right, but just automatically going into a conversation with that as my assumption, not being open-minded to listen to I don't know if I'm not open-minded, but it did convict me that I had my own presumptions.
Well, I think that, as somebody once said, don't have such an open mind that your brains fall out.
Mm.
You know, it's like you have to have, you know, in order to carry on a conversation and to learn and be open to learning, you have to have an open mind to some degree. But yet, you know, you have to adhere to basic principles and reason to kind of limit that openness to something that makes sense.
Right.
I think
Yeah.
what started a lot of that is, weren't like Aristotle, Galileo, weren't they all astronomers? And I think even the constellation are named after Greek gods and stuff. So that was heavily influenced in the pagan world, to where you look at the stars or you look at the gods, plural.
Mhm.
So that was heavily mixed into people's theories about how old everything was. So when you got that much junk going into the mainstream of society, nobody's going to be able to sift through there and find the truth that way. That's why we got to go here.
Yeah, like so I'm gonna call him Jay, because Jay is a long name. So the author Jay, he talks about how he unfairly, criticized or judged Christianity. He precluded the option that there could be anything miraculous or supernatural when he went into judging Christianity, which there has a supernatural element to it, right? Christ died and rose again. God created the universe, and so he unfairly presumed that miracles aren't real, and they can't happen. So with that mindset went into it. Well, of course, you're going to look at that with a completely different viewpoint. Right? His worldview was miracles don't exist and supernatural things don't exist. So if that's the way you think, and then you go, "Oh, I'm going to try and prove this true, or see if it's true." Well, I already believe miracles aren't real, so no, it's not real. It's like,
Well, there are some scientists that did go out trying to prove the Bible false and actually said it's real. There's not a bunch of them, but there's a few out there, and some
Sure.
maybe their readings would help. How did they determine that?
A lot of your original scientists were believers.
mhm.
They were exploring the natural world to find out more about God. It wasn't trying to disprove the existence of God. They were trying to find out more about Him.
Right.
Or try to prove it. But I think with that argument, I don't know with the tactics book, I haven't heard of that one, but if somebody's coming at you and saying scientifically it's a fact, then you have to take them back to their argument. You can't use your argument of belief against their argument of scientific fact. It's like, okay, well, let's go to yours. So if you believe in science, you believe in the scientific method. So let's test your method. You can't just come to me and say it's a fact without actually showing me your tested methods to get to that fact. Like you're saying, it's a theory. So it has to be tested in order to become more of a concrete
And when you
theory
corner a
or
person that,
scientific law, but it
Right.
still isn't a fact.
but if you corner somebody with that mindset and they don't know the other, I mean, I guess you can't just, can't hit them over the head with a Bible or anything, but it's like you said, if they try to prove it, I'm sorry, gotta make a political adjustment on this one. It's the same thing when you ask Kamala Harris a question and she goes up, well, Trump's been in office that isn't the question I asked you. They want her to prove what have you done, and she doesn't know those steps, so she zings around it. So if you pin somebody that's a hardcore,
Evolutionist.
yes, evolution person,
Because ultimately you're going up against belief and belief.
they won't be able to prove it. Then you're gonna get them frustrated and they're gonna walk away from you. So you can try to get them to know the truth by proving your theory, but then when you do that, put them on the spot and they feel attacked, they walk away. That's a hard line to walk.
For me, it's like you're planting seeds. You know, you're not gonna take somebody that's hardcore evolutionist and just overnight, convince them that, oh, wow. But you can plant seeds.
Yeah.
Make them look at the impossibility of life from non-life. Make them look at little tidbits that science has no idea about, you know, and you're planting seeds that, little seed of doubt or a thorn burr under the saddle that if
It's
they're gonna
amazing
work
how
on
that little thing will come to the forefront.
Yeah.
You know, you think that you forgot about it, yeah.
Or is it,
That's exactly what tactic says, their second one, you know, how did you come to that conclusion? Keeps you in the driver's seat, very non-threatening, just how did you come to that conclusion, that's what you're saying, you know, how did you come to that?
Forget cold case. Let's just go back to tactics.
I'm sorry.
No. I mean, it's a really good point because I think to Daniel's point, that's taking the roof off, right? Like going back to the claim that they're making and putting it, you know, taking it for a test drive and seeing where it leads. That's taking the roof off.
well, there's just a practical example. I worked as a mechanic for many, many years, and you know, some things are cut and dried. You know, your wheel fell off. You know, some things are, you know, takes an investigation to try and figure out what's going on, what's wrong, and you know, if you get on the wrong track, if you make presumptions and you get on the wrong track, it's like almost impossible to get the right diagnosis. You know, so you know, every once in a while, if you're, you know, on this track, you have to just step back or maybe get somebody else's input to say, okay, you know, I've gone this direction and it's not working. You know, let me step back and kind of reorient myself, kind of get rid of the presumptions and look at this fresh. And you know, I think that's, a lot of people are so emotionally tied to their presumptions and their ideas that it's really hard to get them to do that, especially with certain subjects.
Do you think that's what happened in the early church? Like they were so emotionally tied to the worldview that they had that when it was challenged, for example, that, you know, the earth is not the center of the universe, that maybe emotion played more into their, you know, truth than reason.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
The Puritans definitely objected to all that, and that's how come they kept moving here and there to get away. As far as the other religions, I haven't studied ancient religions, but I did have to take a world religion class 30 years ago. Kind of escapes me right now.
And like so, Jay was talking about in that homicide, the older homicide detective assumed, oh, it was the husband. The husband did it.
Right.
This is a picture of the husband, and so now they're, you know, wasting time and energy looking at for the husband and whatnot. When in reality, it turned out to be it was the neighbor. And I think that's a good example. Like if you try to take that example further, say you're looking for, you know, someone, and it's a older male Hispanic, and you have to look for this person in a crowd because you're trying to find a person, say, who ate a burrito or something. Well, it's Mexican food, so it must be a Mexican person. I'm just pulling this out of the skin here.
Must be a what?
Must be a Hispanic person because, you know, it's Mexican
It's a
food.
burrito.
Yeah. So you're looking through a crowd to find the owner of this burrito that he left. That's an example of presupposition. You're presupposing that it's Hispanic. And so you're wasting all this time and effort looking when actually it could be anybody.
Well, fun story, when I was in Cancun, I was in a curio shop and I had a sombrero on. And this lady from South Carolina asked me how much it was. I said, I don't know, I'm waiting for the clerk. And she said, bless your heart. She assumed I was a salesman in Mexico. I said, no, I just got the good looks.
But you know, I get emotionally tied to my presuppositions, is that
Yeah.
the right word? As I'm listening to you, I realize I fall into that category. You know, when people challenge me, I can get emotionally, or emotions can come up where I either feel strongly or I might feel threatened. I can see that in me.
I appreciate the intellectual humility that you show with that. It's important to have. I think that's a really valuable discipline to have because we're all guilty of it. It's not just the unbeliever who has presuppositions about naturalism or the impossibility of miracles or whatever. But we even ourselves have those presuppositions, and the first step to having the discipline to navigate that and to understand it is to recognize that we have it. It's like I said, it's really hard not to dive into the next chapter, because in the next chapter he talks about abductive reasoning and how you infer to the most reasonable explanation, and there's quite a bit of real life application of that, particularly for like jury selection. One of the phrases that you hear thrown around a lot is reasonable doubt.
Right.
So like, what's the difference between reasonable doubt and possible doubt? That if somebody is guilty of something beyond all possible doubt, that's far too high of an epistemic standard, because surely you can imagine some circumstance under which it's possible that things are different than the
So
way
you
they
wanna
appear.
prove the death penalty for a 70% consensus?
What?
You said 100%.
Well, no, I'm saying the court system uses reasonable doubt instead of possible doubt, because possible doubt is a impossibly high epistemic
Right,
standard.
now I'm
because-
saying people will take a percentage on that. What is reasonable? Well, I feel about 50-60%. I think this guy is guilty.
Well,
Everybody's presumption is higher than somebody else's, maybe.
well, yeah, I mean, there is that, but I think what he's saying is there is, to have an absolute conclusive is,
It's impossibly
you're
high.
you're speculating
Oh,
of
like
some
conspiracy theories.
some absurd,
Yeah.
completely out of left field deal that's just, there's no evidence whatsoever for it.
But it's possible.
It's possible.
It's possible, yeah. Right,
So
right.
I think that's
Yeah, probably the best illustration I've heard for the difference between possible doubt and reasonable doubt would be going to a grocery store and buying a box of cereal. So you go to the grocery store, you find your favorite cereal box on the shelf, you take it to the checkout, you pay for it, you go home, you open it up, and what do you expect to find in there? Cereal. Right?
Mhm.
Well, but what could be in there? There could be metal, there could be wood chips, there could be sawdust, there could be any number of things. But is it reasonable to believe that that's what you're buying? It's possible, sure, but when you pick it up off the shelf, it feels like it's always felt, it feels normal. If there's no reason to doubt that when you shake it, it doesn't sound all metallic. There's all kinds of things that lead you to reasonably believe that there's cereal inside the box. Now you can't see inside the box, but you can feel it, you can hear it.
Schrodinger's cat.
You're familiar with. Yeah, right. There might be a cat inside. You have no reason to believe that there's anything other than cereal inside. So sure, it's conceivable that something other than cereal could be inside, but it's not reasonable because you're familiar with what a cereal box
Is
feels
that going
like.
to be similar though, as profiling? I think once
yes.
you get burned so many times, you've got these little checklists in your mind.
Oh sure. Well, and that's
when
presumptuous,
you see
right?
somebody, then you look them up and go, look at this guy that just knocked me in the back of the head last week with a baseball bat. I'll
Right.
probably be a little bit more cautious approaching that person. And I think we've always profiled. Always.
Yeah.
And that
Oh,
takes us right back
absolutely.
to what we're
Yeah.
talking
Well,
about today,
and-
right? With presumptions.
Yeah,
And-
presumption.
Profiling, well, maybe this
Well,
a rabbit hole, but anyway,
That's
that's
all right.
what we do here, right?
yeah, I call it turd.
The profiling is how civilization began.
Mhm.
You have these tribes or whatever, and you profile it. Okay, this guy is one of us. This guy's an outsider. This
Yeah, right, ally.
don't
Yeah.
trust this guy. Whatever. I mean, that's how society develops.
Mhm. So to be shocked that it's happening still?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
That's a built-in safety
Yes,
valve for
exactly.
people.
It may be wrong and we need to be open.
Now
But-
that's where, because everybody has presuppositions.
Yeah.
But are we open or are we closed-minded with those? Are we coming to the table empty-handed?
Right.
Or are we just going, well, that person looks bad, and they must be bad, so I'm gonna treat him as bad, or we could be
No,
cautious,
I'm
there's
gonna
nothing
be
wrong with
cautious.
cautious.
Right.
But it's where do you go with that?
Yeah.
I'd rather give him a seed and walk away, to tell you the truth,
Yeah,
than to have any presumption, okay, here you go, here's a brochure, and then walk away.
because everybody has them, whether it be scientific, religious, philosophical, whatever, I like, he even says, anyone who tells you he or she is completely objective or devoid of presuppositions has another more important problem. That person's either astonishingly naive or a liar.
Yeah.
It was funny, there's just an example of this whole deal. My sister's very liberal, and she went to Boston for something, and she got on the subway or the train, and this black guy comes and sits down next to her or across from her, and she's all defensive. She's like, "Oh, that's just racist. I need to, just chill out and just relax." And as he got up to leave on the train, he grabbed her necklace, stole her necklace off her neck. And it was like, well,
It's a bit ironic.
yeah.
I heard an example one time, you're walking alone at night down a dark road or something like that, and you see 3, 4, 5 guys coming, what's your reaction? But then if you saw them carrying a Bible, what's your reaction? The same group of guys.
I would say criminals be scared to death of those Bibles.
You know, see,
It's situational in that sense, like, with the black guy, you're in New York, like, the rate of crime in that city compared to if you were in, I don't know, Colorado. You're
but
here.
you have
It's like-
a beforehand pre-knowledge of events, situations, and like you're in a dark alley. Usually, crimes happen in dark alleys.
Right.
Oh, men are typically more violent, and I'm a female, and I can't protect myself. And so you have all these pieces of knowledge beforehand. Those all build into your thought process and your presuppositions. So,
Well, it's just like when the people were burning down Philadelphia and Minneapolis and all those, they could see the people that lived nearby going, oh, that must be a peaceful protest. There's a good presumption for you. I didn't see it that way, but obviously some people did.
Yeah.
So there's a quote on page 28 from Richard Lewontin, the evolutionary biologist and geneticist, that I'll read to you and we can discuss it. It says, "We take the side of science in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs, in spite of its failure to fulfill many of its extravagant promises of health and life, in spite of the tolerance of the scientific community for unsubstantiated just so stories, because we have a prior commitment to materialism. It's not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world, but on the contrary, that we are forced by our a priori adherence to material causes to create an apparatus of investigation and set of concepts that produce material explanations, no matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated. Moreover, that materialism is an absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door." So essentially, that was a long way of saying that we as scientists, this evolutionary biologist and geneticist Richard Lewontin, admits that the scientific community has committed itself to this position that nothing that isn't scientifically observable or testable is worth considering truth, right? And that admission is one a priori, which I'll get into in just a minute. Have we covered a priori and a posteriori knowledge or epistemology? Okay, I'll cover that in just a second. But that they've committed themselves to this materialism because Nothing outside of the physical universe is accessible by science, and so therefore science doesn't consider that even worth pursuing as truth, right? So back to that Latin phrase in italics here in the book, a priori. There's in epistemology, there's two forms of knowledge. I won't even say truth. I'll just say knowledge. There's two kinds of knowledge. There's a priori and a posteriori. And that has to do with logical precedence. So a priori, as the word prior sound, where we get the word prior is the Latin for before. So that's logically before, and then a posteriori is after. So it's posterior, it's after, it's behind. So the difference between these two kinds of knowledge is your observation of the truth of that knowledge. So a priori would be that you have the knowledge before even testing it. So for example, mathematical truths are considered a priori truths because you don't have to show that 2 + 2 = 4. It's just self-evident. So that's an a priori.
Axiomatic.
Right.
Axiom.
It's an a priori knowledge, meaning that you don't need to prove it for it to be true because it's just so self-evidently true. However, it's also used in cases like this where people make knowledge claims without requiring evidence because it's just so evidently true. And so it's used in the sense of a very high level of commitment to that truth. A posteriori means that you only commit yourself to that claim, that truth claim, after it's been shown to be true. So that's the logical precedence, either before or after, supposed testing, right?
I want to say that I, in large part, agree with his statement. I think that I consider myself not a scientist, but very committed to the scientific principles. And I think that for the vast majority of things, we need to look for a naturalistic explanation. I think that that's the only way you advance your learning and understanding of the natural world. But where I differ from that statement is where he gets to the point where accepting that premise, regardless of the absurdity of the claim. I said there's a limit where the absurd is just outrageously absurd. And at that point, you need to realize and recognize that, okay, this is the limit of science.
Can you think of any examples?
Flat Earth.
For me, it's just the absurdity of life from non-life.
That's a good one.
To
Yeah.
me, that is just the odds and the complexity of life, and the idea that came from random processes is just. I mean, that's fantasy upon fantasy upon fantasy.
How about the multiverse? That's another really good example.
Yeah.
Where science extends outside of the physical realm into metaphysics to explain the inescapable evidence of fine-tuning in the universe. So the universe, has observable constants and quantities that point to this inconceivably minute fine-tuning. The existence of the universe had to have been, fine-tuned to such a degree that unless there was some kind of intelligence involved, there's no way this could have happened by chance. So in order to avoid the intelligent designer, the scientific community has moved out into metaphysics with the fine-tuning of the universe, or the multiverse. The multiverse theory is like, well, it's by chance because we're just one of an inconceivably large number of possible universes that also happen to coexist, and so all of that is totally inaccessible by science. But it's an example of that absurdly complicated and just plain absurd conclusions that have to be driven to in order to avoid the much simpler intelligence behind it, you know.
So I think a good example I can pull from that. So life and non-life is what they call abiogenesis.
Mhm.
So they presuppose that happened. There's no way to test it, replicate it, but they believe it happened. So they take that, and then they look at evolution, and they believe evolution happened, and then they have all these different parts and pieces that they can't test. All that wrapped together, and they have their worldview on evolution, their thought process. All of it's presupposed. Okay? And so when they actually find evidence that's contrary to what they believe, they toss it out the window because, well, it doesn't fit in that box. So when they find that, you know, evolution might not have happened, and there might not be one tree of life. It looks like in the evidence supports that there's many trees of life, and life just emerged. There were big bangs of life that happened. The evidence is contrary to what evolution says, where one cell to little creatures to bigger creatures, and then we all came from one cell. The evidence actually doesn't support that, but because they presuppose that, and they believe that so hardcore, any evidence that's contrary to that, well, that's just, we don't believe it.
And the gaps, they just say,
Yeah.
they haven't found the links yet.
Yeah.
Well, and not only that, but it leads to attacking and ostracizing those that do keep bringing that up, and you know that anyone that attacks their
And it's,
pet theory.
you'll see that in funding, like you'll have,
Mhm.
you won't get funded for a certain project if you're not going in line with that.
That's the truth.
Climate
Yeah.
science is a
Conflicted
great
within
example of that
If you're
right
not
now.
trying to find the links, the
Mhm.
missing links, then your project is
Yeah.
not important for the overall
Yeah, that's a good point.
assumptions.
Randy, what did you call that again? Autogenesis?
Abiogenesis.
Abiogenesis. Thank you.
Translated, it just means life, start of life without life.
That's what that means?
Yeah, life emerging from non-living material,
That's just dirt.
more or less.
Possibility.
Well, there's,
Mhm.
yeah.
I don't know if there's any evidence.
There wasn't-
Possible? Sure. Reasonable?
I don't know. That's a tough one to take. Yeah,
Well, even
think.
possible,
Well,
it's
even-
questionable.
Thing is, even dirt basically is almost has to, in almost all cases, other than just your most basic clays, requires life to form dirt.
Really?
You can have sand and stuff like that, that's just decomposed rock, and some of your clays are, you know, eroded rock, but what we think of typically as dirt,
Oh, yeah, I see what you're
is-
saying. Yeah,
organic in nature.
That's
Oh,
true.
okay.
And it probably has carbon in it.
Yeah, speaking of carbon, so carbon testing is only good up to a certain point because carbon's
Yeah.
half-life.
It's always.
You can only reliably go back, but science will use that. Now they have other kinds of dating too, radiometric and isometric and all kinds of different ones, but people will use like carbon-14 dating, but they're assuming that there's been no extra carbon deposits or changes, huge atmospheric changes in the environment. They're assuming that the rate of carbon decay has been the same for all of time.
That was the biggest issue they
Right, so that's
made
a-
mistake of.
So they're making all these judgments and
Right.
findings and off of a presupposition that, well, it's stayed the same forever. So there's been tests, radiocarbon dating tests of say like stuff that's a bag of flour. That was one of them. And it dated back for 15,000 years ago. Well, that's impossible. There's a date on the bag and for the manufacturer. And they'll send out all these tests. and I'm quoting one specific, I don't remember the name of the test, but they sent it to many labs all over the world. And they got all these different results. But they go, well, we believe that this is from I forget exactly the animal they were testing, and it had to live during this period, so all those other tests just throw them out. It doesn't line up with what we believe we already know. Which in reality, it could actually shape what they know to be different, but they don't accept it.
Yeah, they should have saved the blueprints to the Saturn rocket, but they didn't. But luckily Tesla is very intelligent, so we'll have rockets again. Anyway, a rocket to heaven? Oh no. You'll have to bring those astronauts back to Earth and give them different languages and make them scatter out of that capsule fast.
Somebody who talked about for the ultimate prank would be for those astronauts that are stranded on the space station. Everybody at the NASA or whatever dress up in monkey suits. And Planet of the Apes.
Rock and roll with bananas. Yeah. That's a good movie though.
So this week's chapter is kind of a longer one, but I'm really looking forward to it. Like I said, it's hard not to just like dive straight into the next chapter because he's talking about abductive reasoning and inferring the most reasonable conclusions and things like that. So there's a checklist of sort of criteria for arriving at good conclusions, which we've sort of discussed a little bit back in On Guard. So that'll be a good review for testing or examining arguments. What makes a good argument, and how to arrive to the most reasonable conclusion. So with that, are there any final questions or discussion about chapter 1 for this week?
Well, when he talks about differentiating between science and scientism, I've never heard of scientism before.
Yeah, so scientism is a word that gets thrown around a lot in Christian apologetics, where scientism, so the ism part at the end, I feel it's kind of derogatory, to be honest. I don't take the term lightly because I don't want to draw presuppositions about people, but scientism is the idea of an overcommitment to science as a worldview. So scientism would be the philosophical worldview that nothing that is not scientifically testable is worth considering as truth, right? So like anything that you can't prove in a laboratory with a scientific experiment isn't true, and it's not even worth considering as truth. But the problem with that is, can you test that claim, right? So like nothing that you can't test in a scientific lab is true. Well, can you test that in a scientific lab? It's a self-defeating premise, right?
That's a philosophical statement.
Right.
Why don't they just take those well-known particles they know about that collided and put them in a collider and create a mini universe in space right there in the machine? If it's that easy to figure out.
Well, so the problem with scientism is that there are a number of things that science doesn't have access to, but we presuppose are true, right? So, for example, math. Can you test the truth of math and logic with science? No, we just presume that math and logic are true and reliable, right? There's a lot of things like metaphysical truths that science does not have access to, but scientists everywhere presuppose they're true, like the fact that. Well, like when I say metaphysical, yeah, like consciousness, or that the universe wasn't created 5 minutes ago with the appearance of age.
You get yourself one of those drums and run that around.
No, see, I'm not talking about metaphysical in like the mystical sense, more the philosophical sense. That
They have a philosophy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like
I have to go to Manitou more often
I'm not talking
find
about
much of it there.
I'm not talking about that kind of metaphysics. I'm talking about the metaphysics metaphysics meaning like the physics of physics, so to speak. Like the idea that there are 6 minds in this room. Like I'm not the only person here. Like you're a person. Like I'm not the only one here who's just like imagining.
You
all
gotta
this.
add that mind.
Right. Right. Well, that's metaphysical though. Like science doesn't have access to the reality of, you know, the consciousness in this room, right? Or that, you know, anything is even real. Like, you know, Rene Descartes, there's the famous expression, you know, I think therefore I am. That's a metaphysical conclusion that he arrived at because the 5 senses can be deceived, can't they? Like your sight can be deceived. You can believe something that's not true based on your eyesight alone.
Hallucinations.
Yeah,
Even
hallucination.
that face of Jesus in that Frito-Lay chip was false. Hey, I'm not going to throw it away now.
But science has no access to that, right? So like there are a lot of things that science does not have access to that we just presume are true. Even within science itself, science is permeated with assumptions that scientists have to accept before they can even continue to perform, you know,
Like
experiments.
us have to believe in the Trinity to even go forward with Christianity. If you don't have that basis premise, you won't understand anything.
Well, but that's
you're
not
gonna
a
do.
presumption though. That's
It
not
will-
a
It will be in the person you're talking to, though. That's going to be. They're going to say that's your presumption.
I
hear that all the
suppose.
time. Well, I don't believe in the Trinity. You know, you do, so that's the difference. Okay, then we have to talk about it.
But that's based on evidence. I mean,
Right.
there is evidence, there's documentation.
We have all that
so-
evidence, and there's still people that don't
Well,
believe.
right,
it, so-
right. But
But we're talking about a priori assumptions, right? So like, for example, what I was getting at with scientific presumptions would be like the speed of light. We can't test the speed of light. We can't prove, you know, what the speed of light is. We just have to accept that presumption before we, you know, the science, the theory of the special theory of relativity hinges on the speed of light, but we can't prove that in a laboratory. You know, so that assumption is taken before even proceeding. So just the point is that you know, even science itself has presumptions that are inaccessible to the scientific method. And so scientism, back to Debbie's question.
It depends on what light you're talking about. Is it sunlight or a flashlight or any light from a bulb that's generated?
it's anything, yeah.
Yeah,
Because isn't it a photon? I don't know what part that is that illuminates. But you're telling me that doesn't dissipate ever once it's released?
no, it does, but the
It can be
special theory of,
absorbed, but-
right, the special theory of relativity hinges on a constant speed of light, which we can't. I mean, we can calculate it, but we can't test it. You know, we don't have a speed gun fast enough to measure. We can't measure the speed of light. You know,
And is it always the same for all of time?
Right.
Or does it change over time?
Mhm.
Kind of like the rate of decay of carbon.
Is it affected by gravity? I think, for me, I think scientism, the idea of ism is belief or religion.
right.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Belief in science.
So science as a religion, I think, is my kind of conceptual
Right.
picture of that, of scientism.
Sorry, go ahead.
Scientism, I think, is often used for methodological naturalism, which is another ism, but it's the same thought process that science has to be proved by completely natural means. You cannot use anything supernatural at all. So methodological naturalism is a mouthful, so a lot of people say scientism. But
That's a good way to put it.
scientism also bleeds over into philosophical naturalism, which is the thought that our thoughts and creation, or not creation, or it can be, but the way we think, the epistemology, which is the study of knowledge, has to be explained with
Are
natural
you in the
causes.
science field?
Well, I mean, I like science,
Well,
but no.
I mean,
I
I'm just
I
wondering.
play with
that's your
electrons,
background.
so I'm an electrician.
Oh, okay.
So philosophical naturalism is saying you can't have any supernatural, you can't explanations for
Or even non-physical.
yeah.
Non-physical.
Everything
Yeah.
is reducible to matter and energy. So like even your thoughts and memories are reducible to brain states.
Your brain and your mind, according to philosophical naturalism, are one and the same. But we know our mind and our brain are two different things.
And so
Look, wow.
It gets deep.
I
Yeah.
never thought about it, so
Yeah.
I'm just listening.
No, I am too.
well, and Dr. Wallace concedes to the opposite. So like he's pointing out that other people have the tendency to have these presuppositions that restrict them to kind of a narrow worldview. But he himself admits that he says, I understand that the phenomena we observe can be explained satisfactorily by the simple relationships between matter and the laws of nature. For this reason, I try to be careful not to jump to supernatural explanations when natural causes are supported evidentially. Not all of God's activity is overtly miraculous. God is still at work even in the interaction between the matter he created and the natural laws that reflect his nature. This is, in fact, miraculous enough. As a result, I try to encourage my skeptical friends to re-examine their natural presuppositions, but I am careful to respect the claims of naturalists when they're evidentially supported. So,
That's
like,
just what I said.
yeah, like Debbie was saying, it's important not only to recognize the biases and presuppositions that other people have, but also the biases and presuppositions that we have.
Yeah, one thing that I, just in kind of going back to your initial, what you brought up, your interaction, with the age of the universe.
Mhm.
I tell people that I believe that the Earth is roughly 6,000 years, because I find that is the biblical approach. But I do have this reservation, and I try to be willing to share this, is that, okay, there is evidence of a much older universe, and there is some evidence of a scientific evidence that supports the 6,000 year age of the Earth. So I'd say that scientifically, I'm ambiguous on the age of the Earth, or the age of the universe. But because of my Christian beliefs, I adhere to what I believe the Bible teaches, and that's the 6,000 year. So that's kind of my willingness to be open-minded and kind of not have this cut and dried view or opinion that is not open to evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's an intellectual humility to admit bias. And I think if you have that humility, that'll go a long way, from the tactics side of things to, having a more open-minded conversation with a non-believer. Because, if you come in hard and strong and, hard-headed, like, you're going to be met with resistance. And so, from not just from the science side, so to speak, but the art side, I think there's an art and a science to apologetics. And I think we tend to get so wrapped up in the science of it, the facts and the evidence and the arguments, that we tend to neglect the art, which is, the gentleness and respect and the tactics, the approach, the human side of it, and if we neglect that, if we don't have this intellectual humility, you're gonna come across as dogmatic and hard-headed, and you'll just, you'll be met like with like. And so, if nothing else, I hope that the main takeaway from this chapter is to understand yourself as well as other people, and have the intellectual humility to admit that we all have presuppositions. We all have biases that affect the way we see things, and so, sometimes those are valuable to inform the way we look at things, and sometimes they can be a stumbling block. They can get in the way of finding truth. So with that, shall we close with prayer?
Oh, one real quick question though. Now, I was gonna download the Kindle, but do you have to have a Kindle for that to work?
No, not necessarily. It's a PDF file.
Oh, well, then I'll do it this weekend.
Okay.
Okay.
John, I have one more question.
Sure,
You
sure.
quoted, I think it was Descartes.
Mhm,
How did it go? I think, therefore I am, or?
Mhm. Yeah, it's I think therefore I am, and that was a philosophical examination of how do we determine reality? Like, what is reality rooted in? Is reality rooted in what we can observe and detect with our five senses? Well, but the problem with that is that all five of our senses can be deceived, right? So like reality itself, the very fabric of what we perceive as reality could very well be the product of an evil demon, teasing you and tricking you into thinking that we're in a room inside of Envoy Church in Colorado Springs, Colorado in the year 2024. Like all of that could be false, all
Or
of
not.
Truman
It'd
Show.
be like the movie The Cube. You walk through another door and you're in a different reality.
Well, the point is that do I exist? If nothing else, like even if it were true that we're not really in this room, we're not really in the year 2024 in Colorado Springs, in the month of October, we're not really here sitting behind this physical table.
October? Darn it.
If nothing else, at the very least, the point of that statement is that at the very least, I know that I am real because I can think. I'm thinking. So I think, therefore I am. I exist. That's
What
what
are you thinking?
well, you're having this conversation like it's originating from within. It couldn't have originated from the evil
We'll see
demon
how well they
who's
can teach
sending
if
you
you
all
cut
these
off his
lies.
oxygen. That's a presumption on my part, but I think I'm pretty right on that one.
Any other questions or comments? Would anybody like to close this in prayer? Otherwise, I will.
Okay, I will. There we go. Dear Lord, we'd like to thank you for today. We know that wherever two or more meet in your name, you're present. I
Yes.
appreciate you being here, listening to us, guiding us, and just having us share your word amongst each other to get to know you better. Just help us to continue to do this through all the classes. Give us a safe trip home. We ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks, Mike.